Echo 7. The camera saw what happened. Nobody can explain it.
8 women, 8 American hotels. Every one of them checked in. None of them came home. The card was swiped at 12:07 in the afternoon. The room was unlocked. The door closed. The camera in the hallway recorded the door closing. The next time anyone opened that door was 6 hours later, when housekeeping arrived for evening service and found the room empty. The bed had not been slept in. The suitcase was still open on the floor. The phone charger was still plugged into the wall. The toothbrush was in the bathroom glass. The guest who had checked in was not there. This happens in American hotels every year. Not once, hundreds of times. People check into rooms that the building is built to remember. The card swipe creates a record. The front desk video records the face. The hallway cameras record the walk to the elevator. The elevator records the floor. The hallway cameras record the entry into the room. The door log records every opening and closing. The phone log records every call placed from the room. The minibar sensor records every item moved. By any reasonable measure of modern American surveillance, the hotel guest is the most thoroughly recorded person in the country at the moment they check in. And then, in some number of those cases, the guest stops being recorded. The records continue. The door stays unopened. The camera continues to point at the hallway. The other guests come and go. The lobby fills and empties on its hourly cycle. The records of the building are perfect. The records of the guest end. I am Echo 7. What you are about to hear are 8 American cases in which the hotel did exactly what the hotel was built to do. The cameras worked. The card systems worked. The front desks logged the arrivals. The witnesses gave the statements. And in every case, the building remembered the moment of arrival and could not explain what happened after. The investigation files referenced here come from FBI bulletins, state and local police press releases, court records in the cases that have reached trial, coroner reports where bodies have been recovered, and major media coverage. Some details have been described in general terms where files remain partially sealed or where surviving families have asked that specific particulars be withheld. Every name you will hear is real and appears as it does in the public record. Every hotel is real. Every date is real. Nothing here is fiction. The cases span 4 decades. The oldest is from 1983. The freshest is from March of this year. They cross 7 states and 2 international resort destinations that drew American travelers. The victims range in age from 17 to 30. They were students, aspiring actresses, vacationers, daughters traveling with friends on spring break, mothers, women in their 30s on weekend getaways. They have one thing in common, and one thing only. They each walked into a hotel that was built to record them, and the recording ended at the threshold of the room, or the lobby door, or the side exit, or the elevator floor. There is one case I have to address before we go any further, because if I do not address it, every viewer of this video will be thinking about it the entire time. I am going to address it directly. Then we move on to the 8 cases that deserve more attention than they have received. Her name was Elisa Lamb. She was 21 years old. She was a Canadian university student at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver. In January of 2013, she took a solo trip through California. She was diagnosed with bipolar disorder and was managing it with prescribed medication, including lithium. She checked into the Cecil Hotel in downtown Los Angeles on the 26th of January of that year. She intended to stay several days and then travel onward. She was last seen on January 31st. On February 19th, after almost 3 weeks of search efforts that included missing person bulletins distributed by the Los Angeles Police Department, after a maintenance worker at the hotel, investigated complaints from guests about low water pressure and discoloration in the taps. Elisa's body was found in one of the 4 rooftop water tanks of the Cecil Hotel. The water tank was 8 feet tall. The access required climbing a fire escape and entering a rooftop area that was supposed to be alarmed and locked. Between her last sighting on January 31st and her death, the hotel's surveillance cameras recorded a piece of footage that has become, without exaggeration, the single most watched piece of hotel surveillance video in the history of the internet. The footage shows Elisa inside one of the Cecil Hotel's elevators. She is alone. She is acting in a way that has been described by every viewer who has seen the clip as deeply unusual. She presses multiple buttons on the elevator panel. She steps in and out of the elevator. She appears to hide in the corner. She makes gestures with her hands that look, depending on the interpretation, like she is talking to someone unseen, or like she is trying to communicate with someone outside the elevator who is not visible in the frame. At no point does anyone else appear on camera. The elevator doors do not close for several minutes, despite the buttons being pressed. Eventually, she leaves the frame. The doors close. The footage ends. The Los Angeles County Department of Coroner ruled Elisa's death an accidental drowning, with bipolar disorder listed as a significant contributing factor. The investigation concluded that she had, while in a state related to her psychiatric condition, climbed onto the roof of the hotel, opened the water tank, and entered the water. The cause of death and the manner of death were accepted by the official record. I am telling you this case first because I have to. Anyone who has ever searched the phrase "missing in a hotel" on the internet has watched the Cecil Hotel elevator footage. It is the reference point. It is the image that defines the category. Any video about hotel disappearances that does not acknowledge it would be dishonest by omission. But I am not going to spend the rest of this case dissecting the elevator video frame by frame. That work has been done. The forensic analysis has been published. The case has been featured on national television, on multiple streaming documentaries, on every true crime podcast that has ever existed. The water tank investigation has been picked over by professional and amateur reviewers for more than a decade. If you have not already formed a view on what happened at the Cecil Hotel, no further analysis from me is going to change that. What I will say, and what is relevant to the 8 cases that follow, is something about what the Elisa Lam case revealed about hotels themselves. The Cecil Hotel, in 2013, was a low-end hotel in a difficult part of downtown Los Angeles. The building had a long and disturbing history that predated Elisa's case by decades, involving deaths, criminal incidents, and famous true crime connections. The surveillance system at the Cecil was, by the standards of luxury hotels, basic. There were cameras in the lobby and in the elevators. There were not comprehensive cameras in every hallway, on every stairwell, on every roof access point. The alarm on the rooftop water tank access either did not function, was disabled, or was insufficient. The water tanks themselves were the building's primary water supply for guest rooms. What the Elisa Lam case demonstrated is that even when a hotel has the recording infrastructure to capture a guest in distress, that recording does not necessarily produce intervention. Multiple hotel employees presumably reviewed surveillance feeds on the night Elisa was in the elevator. Hotel security presumably had access to the same footage at the time. The hotel was a working business with staff on duty, and Elisa, visibly distressed and behaving in a manner that any reasonable observer would have flagged as requiring a welfare check, went up to the roof. She entered the water. No one stopped her. This is the lesson I want you to carry forward into the next 8 cases. Surveillance is not safety. The presence of a camera in a hallway does not mean anyone is watching the camera. The existence of footage of a person in distress does not mean anyone with the authority to help will see that footage before the person can no longer be helped. Hotels build cameras for a specific institutional purpose, which is to manage liability and reduce theft and respond to incidents after the fact. Hotels do not build cameras to monitor every guest in real time for early warning signs of crisis. Nobody does. The technology to monitor every camera in real time exists, but the staffing model to act on what is monitored does not. Elisa Lamb went into an elevator in a hotel that recorded her. The recording exists. The recording shows her in distress. The recording did not save her. The water tank was 8 feet tall, and the alarm did not work or was not heard. The Los Angeles Fire Department had to cut into the side of the tank to remove her body. That is the case the audience already knows. Now to the 8 cases that have not been picked over for a decade by every true crime channel on the internet. These are American cases. They involve American hotels, or hotels frequented by American travelers. They involve front desks, card swipes, hallway cameras, room phones, side exits, beach access doors, and parking garages. In every one of them, the hotel did exactly what the hotel was built to do. And in every one of them, the guest crossed a threshold the building was not designed to follow. Her name was Sudiksha Konanki. She was 20 years old. She was a junior at the University of Pittsburgh, where she was studying biology with the intention of going on to medical school. Her family had emigrated from India when she was a young child. She had grown up in northern Virginia. Her parents, Subbarao and Sridevi Konanki, were both physicians. She was, by every account given by friends, classmates, and family in the weeks and months that followed her disappearance, the kind of young person who organized her life around long-term goals. She was on a spring break trip in March of this year. The trip was a 5-night stay at a large all-inclusive resort in Punta, Cana, Dominican Republic, called the Republica. She traveled with a group of friends from the University of Pittsburgh. On the evening of March 5th, the group went out to the resort bars and continued drinking back at the resort after the bars closed. Sometime before dawn on March 6th, Sudiksha and several members of her group walked from the resort grounds onto the beach. The beach in front of the Republica is open. It is a public beach by Dominican law, though the resort maintains lounge chairs, umbrellas, and security personnel during daytime hours. At the hour Sudiksha walked onto the sand, the beach was empty except for her group. There were no resort lifeguards on duty. There was no resort security presence on the beach itself. The lighting on the beach came from the resort buildings behind them and from the moon overhead. What happened next has been pieced together from witness statements by members of the group, from limited surveillance footage from the resort property, and from the subsequent investigation conducted jointly by the Dominican Republic National Police and the United States Federal Bureau of Investigation, which consulted on the case because the victim was an American citizen. According to the account given by members of the group, Sudiksha and one of her male companions, an American student from another university who had met her on the trip, walked from the beach into the water. The water at the Republica beach is shallow for some distance from shore and then drops off. The morning tide on March 6th was, by Dominican meteorological records, running strong outward. Currents at that section of the Punta Cana coastline are known to be hazardous in certain tide and weather conditions. The companion later returned to shore alone. He told investigators that he had become tired in the water and had returned. He had not seen Sudiksha return. Sudiksha did not return. By mid-morning on March 6th, members of her group realized she had not come back to the resort room. Her belongings were in the room exactly as she had left them the previous evening. Her phone, her passport, her wallet, her clothes for the trip, her toiletries, everything that defined her as a guest of the resort remained in the room. She had walked to the beach in the clothing she had on, and she had not returned to retrieve any of it. The Dominican Republic National Police were notified. The search began. What followed was a multi-day search operation that drew international attention. The Dominican Republic Coast Guard searched the waters off the Punta Cana coastline using boats, helicopters, and divers. Resort security personnel and Dominican National Police searched the resort grounds, the surrounding beaches, the nearby properties, and the small roadways inland from the coast. The FBI, in coordination with the United States State Department, sent representatives to consult with Dominican authorities and to keep the Konanki family informed of developments. The family flew to the Dominican Republic and stayed for several weeks, participating in the search and giving press interviews. The hotel surveillance from the Republica was reviewed extensively. The cameras at the resort entrance, at the lobby, at various points within the property, and at the boundary where the resort grounds meet the public beach were all examined. The footage confirmed Sudiksha's movements through the resort during her stay. The footage captured her walking with her group toward the beach on the morning of March 6th. The footage did not capture her returning. There is no surveillance camera mounted to record what happens on the beach itself or in the water beyond it. The threshold between the resort's recorded space and the open beach was the threshold past which she vanished from the system. The Dominican Republic authorities, after several days of searching, classified the case as a probable drowning. The currents, the time of morning, the alcohol consumed during the previous evening, the absence of any evidence of foul play, the companion's account, all of these factors led the Dominican investigators to conclude that the most likely explanation was that Sudiksha had been overcome by the water, and that her body had been carried out to sea by the outgoing tide. No body was recovered. The Dominican authorities have not changed this classification in the months since. The Konanki family, in June of this year, petitioned the Loudoun County Circuit Court in Virginia to issue a declaration of death in absentia. The court granted the petition. As of that date, Sudiksha Konanki is legally recognized as deceased in the state of Virginia. Her parents have continued to advocate for additional investigation and have publicly questioned aspects of the official Dominican findings, particularly the level of access investigators had to the male companion who returned from the water alone. Subarao Konanki, Sudiksha's father, gave a series of interviews in the weeks and months following his daughter's disappearance that deserve attention. He was, in those interviews, careful. He was not making accusations. He was asking questions. The questions he was asking were the questions any father in his position would ask. Why did the male companion who returned from the water not raise an alarm when he realized Sudiksha was not behind him? Why did he not contact resort security? Why did he not return to the beach? Why did he not call out for help? Why did the absence of Sudiksha go unnoticed by anyone in the group for hours after the male companion came back alone? These questions have not been answered in any public statement by the Dominican authorities or by the male companion himself. The Dominican investigative process, as it relates to American victims, is constrained by the legal framework of the Dominican Republic. The FBI's role is consultative rather than directive. American authorities cannot conduct their own investigation on Dominican soil. They can request information. They can offer technical assistance. They can encourage cooperation. They cannot take operational control of a case that has occurred in another country, however prominent the American victim may be. This jurisdictional reality has shaped and continues to shape dozens of cases every year in which American tourists die or disappear at international resorts. The Republica resort has, in the months since Sudiksha's disappearance, continued operating normally. The beach in front of the property continues to be open to guests. The currents at that section of coastline continue to run strong at certain tides. The lighting on the beach during early morning hours continues to be ambient rather than direct. The lifeguard schedule at the property continues to begin in the morning hours after Sudiksha and her companion went into the water. None of the institutional features of the resort that contributed to the geography of her disappearance have been altered. Pause here, because this case raises a question to consider as we move through the rest of the video. Sudiksha was on a property that, in its capacity as a major international resort, had every modern surveillance infrastructure you would expect. Cameras at the entry, cameras in the lobby, cameras in the hallways, cameras at the elevator banks, cameras at the pool areas, cameras at the bars. By the standards of hotel surveillance, the Republica was a near-perfect recording environment. And yet, when Sudiksha walked off the resort property and onto the public beach in front of it, every one of those cameras became useless, not because they failed, because they were never designed to look at the place she went. A resort camera is mounted to record activity that the resort can be held liable for. The public beach is not the resort's liability zone. The resort's liability ends at the property line, at the edge of the manicured grounds. Beyond that, the resort has no institutional reason to install cameras. This is the architecture of hotel surveillance you need to understand. Hotels and resorts build cameras to protect themselves, not to protect you. When you cross out of the property's liability zone, you cross out of the building's surveillance entirely. The beach in front of a resort, the parking lot outside the gates, the side road behind the loading dock, the alley next to the staff entrance, all of these are spaces that the building has no institutional reason to record. The cameras stop at the property line. There is one more aspect of Sudiksha's case to address before we move on. The international travel patterns of young Americans have shifted significantly over the past 2 decades. Spring break trips to Caribbean and Mexican resorts have become a standard rite of passage for college students. The all-inclusive resort model, in which a single property provides lodging, food, entertainment, beach access, and bar service within an enclosed environment, has made these trips logistically simple and financially accessible. The resort model creates an illusion of safety that the property line does not enforce. The cameras inside the resort feel comprehensive. The bracelets that identify guests at the gate feel like a security perimeter. The staff who circulate through the property feel like a network of watchful eyes. None of these features extend past the property line. The currents in front of the property do not care about the bracelets. The public beach at 4 a.m. does not know which guests belong to which resort. The cameras stop. The protection, such as it was always an illusion that extended only as far as the property's exposure to liability. Sudiksha walked across a property line. The cameras stopped. The currents did the rest. Her family has not been able to bury her because no one knows where she is. The next case took place inside the United States, in a Texas city famous for music and college football, at a hotel that no longer exists in the same form it had on the night of the disappearance. The case is nearly 20 years old now. It has never been solved. It is, in my view, one of the most underreported missing persons cases in the modern history of American hotel disappearances. Her name was Roxanne Paltauf. She was 18 years old. She had grown up in the small town of Cedar Creek, Texas, about 30 miles southeast of Austin. She had moved to Austin in the period leading up to her disappearance, taking work and living with her boyfriend, a man named Richard Houseman. The relationship, by the accounts of family members and people who knew the couple at the time, had been turbulent. There had been periods when they lived together and periods when they did not. In July of 2006, they were living together, but argued frequently. On the evening of July 7, 2006, Roxanne and Richard were staying at a budget motel in North Austin, off Interstate 35. The motel was a budget inn, the kind of low-cost lodging that served as both transient accommodation for travelers passing through Austin and short-term housing for people in unsettled living situations. The check-in record at the motel confirmed that the room had been registered to Richard. Roxanne was present in the room with him. Sometime during the evening of the 7th, the couple had a serious argument. The specifics of the argument have been described in the years since by family members based on accounts Richard later gave. The argument, by every version that has been publicly described, was verbal rather than physical. At some point during or shortly after the argument, Roxanne told Richard that she was leaving. She gathered some of her belongings. She walked out of the motel room. According to Richard's account, he believed she was either going to call a friend for a ride or walking to a nearby location where she would wait to be picked up. She did not call. She did not arrive anywhere that has been documented. She was not picked up by any friend who has subsequently come forward. She walked out of the motel room and into the night, and was not seen again by anyone who could later be located and interviewed. The motel in question, the Budget Inn on Interstate 35 in North Austin, had limited surveillance in 2006. The era was not yet the era of modern hotel security. There were cameras at the front office. There were not cameras in every hallway, on every exterior pathway, in the parking lot at the level of detail you would expect from a modern hotel. The cameras that did exist were of relatively low resolution, recorded onto tape systems with limited retention, and were not reviewed in real time by anyone with the authority to act. The Austin Police Department, when they began their investigation, found that the surveillance available to them was minimal. What this meant, in practical terms, is that the central piece of evidence in Roxanne's disappearance, the question of which direction she walked when she left the motel room, has never been definitively answered. The motel had multiple exits. There was a front entrance facing the parking lot. There was a rear pathway that led to a sidewalk along a service road. There was an alleyway between the motel building and a neighboring property. Any of these routes was available to Roxanne when she left her room. The surveillance did not, in any reviewable form, document which she chose. The Austin police investigation focused, in the early weeks, on Richard. This is standard procedure in the disappearance of an adult woman from a hotel room she shared with a partner. Richard was interviewed multiple times. His timeline for the night of the 7th and the early morning of the 8th was reconstructed. He cooperated with the investigation. He took a polygraph examination. The results of the polygraph, by accounts in subsequent investigative reporting, did not produce a clear pass or fail outcome, but did not, in the judgment of the investigators, justify treating him as the prime suspect. He was not charged. He has never been charged. He has continued to maintain, in the years since, that he had no involvement in her disappearance, and that he believes she walked out of the motel and was harmed by someone she encountered after she left. Roxanne's mother, Elizabeth Paltauf, has spent the past 19 years working on her daughter's case. She has organized search efforts. She has maintained a website. She has spoken to local Texas media on every available anniversary of the disappearance. She has worked with cold case advocacy organizations. She has, in interviews given over the years, expressed a particular kind of exhaustion that families of long-missing adults often come to inhabit. The case remains open with the Austin Police Department. It hasn't been resolved. What Elizabeth has consistently said in those interviews is that she does not believe her daughter walked away from the motel and quietly disappeared. She believes that her daughter encountered someone, either on the motel property or in the immediate area surrounding it, who harmed her. The location, off Interstate 35, north of downtown Austin in 2006, was a corridor with documented activity related to drug trafficking, prostitution, and the transient population that moves between Texas border cities and Austin. The Texas Department of Public Safety has, in subsequent years, conducted multiple operations in that corridor related to human trafficking. The motel where Roxanne was last seen has been the subject of repeated police calls over the years for incidents unrelated to her case. What strikes me about what Elizabeth has been saying for 19 years is the kind of attention that some American missing persons cases receive, and the kind that others do not. The Sudiksha Konanki case, fresh in March of this year, drew immediate national and international media coverage. The Natalee Holloway case, which I will discuss shortly, drew years of saturation national coverage. Roxanne Paltauf, 18 years old, missing for nearly 2 decades from a motel off an American interstate, has received a fraction of that attention. Her mother has had to be the engine of every public reminder. The economics of media coverage of missing American adults does not distribute attention evenly. Cases that fit certain profiles involving travel, scenic locations, or high-profile family circumstances get coverage. Cases that look like a young woman walking out of a budget motel after an argument do not get coverage in proportion to their importance. What I find difficult about this case is the kind of hotel involved. The Budget Inn off Interstate 35 was not a luxury property with comprehensive surveillance. It was a budget property with the surveillance infrastructure of a working motel. This category of lodging exists across the United States, in every city, on every interstate. There are tens of thousands of them. They serve travelers, workers, families in transition, people who need a place to stay for a night or a week without the cost of a higher-end hotel. The surveillance at these properties is, on average, exactly what it was at the Roxanne Paltauf Budget Inn in 2006. Limited, low resolution, front office only, not reviewed in real time. The corporate economics of budget motels actively discourage investment in surveillance. The margins are thin. The customer base is often transient and not concerned with the absence of surveillance. The franchise owners have minimal incentive to spend money on cameras that will mostly record incidents the motel is not legally obligated to prevent. The result is a category of American lodging, comprising a significant percentage of all hotel rooms in the country, where the surveillance infrastructure is decades behind the surveillance infrastructure of higher-end properties. The people who stay at these properties are often the people most vulnerable to becoming missing persons cases. The properties where they stay are the properties least equipped to help find them when they do. When a person disappears from this kind of property, the investigation has to fall back on witnesses, physical evidence, and the cooperation of the people who were known to be present. If those sources do not produce information, the case stalls. Roxanne's case stalled. It stalled because the property where she was last documented did not have the recording infrastructure that would have answered, in the simplest possible way, the simplest possible question: which direction did she go? The next case happened in California in 2021, in a category of lodging that did not exist when Roxanne disappeared in 2006. The category is vacation rental. The platform is Airbnb and its competitors. The hotel, in this case, is a private property listed for short-term rental by a homeowner, with all of the surveillance, or lack of surveillance, that a private property in a remote location implies. Her name was Lauren Cho. She was 30 years old. She had grown up in New Jersey, where she had worked as a music teacher and had a stable life before deciding to make a significant change. In the summer of 2021, she had ended a long-term relationship, left her teaching position, and was traveling in California with a new partner, a man named Cody Bearden. The relationship with Bearden was new. The trip was, in some sense, an attempt to start over. On June 28th of 2021, Lauren and Cody were staying at a remote vacation rental in Yucca Valley, California. Yucca Valley is a small town in the high desert of southeastern California, near Joshua Tree National Park. The terrain around the town is open desert, with scattered Joshua trees, creosote bushes, exposed rock formations, and very little water. Summer temperatures in Yucca Valley regularly exceed 100 degrees Fahrenheit during the day. The vacation rental where Lauren and Cody were staying was a converted school bus retrofitted into a living space located on a remote private property accessible by a dirt road. The property had no immediate neighbors. The nearest paved road was a significant distance away. Cellular service in the area was, by all accounts of people who were familiar with that section of the high desert, unreliable. During the day of June 28th, an argument occurred between Lauren and Cody. The specifics of the argument have been described, in the months and years since, by Cody himself and by the investigators with the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department who interviewed him. The argument, by his account, was emotional. Lauren, by his account, became upset and walked out of the vacation rental into the surrounding desert. She did not take her phone. She did not take her wallet. She did not take water. She walked out in the clothing she had on and into terrain that, at midday in June in the high desert, was potentially lethal to anyone without water and shade. Cody told investigators that he expected Lauren to return within a short period. The Mojave Desert does not provide places to walk to. There is nowhere to go. He waited. She didn't come back. As the afternoon turned to evening, Cody began to search the immediate area around the rental. He did not find her. He eventually drove out to a location where cellular service was available and contacted authorities. The San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department initiated a search. The search continued for weeks. Helicopters covered the terrain in expanding circles from the vacation rental. Ground teams with K-9 units walked transects through the desert. Drones with thermal imaging surveyed the area at night. Volunteers from search and rescue organizations from across Southern California joined the effort. The Cho family flew out from New Jersey and stayed during the search. Haley Cho, Lauren's sister, became, over the weeks of the search, one of the more visible advocates for missing persons cases in remote terrain. Lauren was not found in the initial weeks. The active search eventually scaled back. Months passed. The case became a missing persons file that the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department maintained, but could not actively work without new information. On October 9th of 2021, more than 3 months after Lauren walked into the desert, her remains were found by hikers in a remote area approximately a mile from the vacation rental property. The recovery took the family by surprise because the area where the remains were found had, by some accounts, been within the initial search radius. The condition of the remains, after 3 months of exposure to high desert summer conditions, complicated the medical examiner's work, but the eventual determination was that Lauren had died of heat-related causes consistent with exposure to extreme summer temperatures without water. Sometime on the period between Lauren's disappearance and the recovery of her remains, because the conduct of the investigation during those months illustrates something important about modern vacation rental disappearances. Cody Bearden, Lauren's partner at the rental, was the only witness to her departure into the desert. His account of the argument that preceded her walking out, of the timing of her departure, of his own actions afterward, was the only account anyone had. The San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department spent significant time interviewing him, reviewing his timeline, and assessing whether his story was consistent with the physical evidence at the property. The Cho family, and a substantial portion of the public who followed the case in real time, raised questions about his account. Why had he not pursued her into the desert immediately? Why had he waited as long as he did before contacting authorities? Why had certain details of his timeline shifted between his initial statement and his subsequent interviews? The Sheriff's Department, after weeks of investigation, did not classify him as a suspect. They classified him as a witness. He cooperated. He participated in the search. He gave interviews. Whether his account was fully accurate, or whether the gaps in his account reflected innocent confusion in a moment of crisis or something else, is a question the investigation did not definitively answer. Haley Cho, Lauren's sister, became the public face of the search effort during those months. She flew from New Jersey to California. She slept in motels and rental cars near Yucca Valley. She organized volunteer search teams. She gave interviews to local and national media. She used social media to keep her sister's case in front of the public during a period when news coverage of missing person cases was being overwhelmed by other stories. Haley, by her own account, given in subsequent interviews, was driven by the conviction that Lauren had not simply collapsed in the desert. She believed her sister deserved an active search rather than a passive missing persons file. She was, in the months following the disappearance, what advocates for missing persons cases describe as the engine. Every case that gets sustained attention has an engine. In Lauren's case, Haley was it. The recovery of the remains in October did not resolve all of the questions Haley had been raising. The official conclusion of heat-related death within a mile of the rental was consistent with the physical environment, but did not fully explain the search history. Sheriff's Department teams had walked transects through that area in the days immediately following Lauren's disappearance. Helicopters had flown over it. K-9 units had been deployed. The absence of any earlier discovery in an area that had been searched repeatedly raised questions that the official investigation did not address in detail. Whether Lauren's body had been moved at some point during the 3 months between her disappearance and her recovery, whether she had survived longer in the desert than the heat-related determination suggested, or whether the initial searches had simply missed her in terrain that is notoriously difficult to search, are questions that the public record doesn't definitively answer. The Cody Bearden subsequent history added another layer to the public conversation about the case. In the year following Lauren's death, Bearden was arrested in unrelated incidents in other jurisdictions. The Cho family has, in subsequent interviews, expressed views about whether the official conclusion that Lauren walked into the desert voluntarily and died of exposure is the full story. The San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department has not reopened the case based on those concerns. What stays with me about this case is the category of lodging involved. A converted school bus on a remote private property accessible by dirt road, listed on a short-term rental platform for travelers seeking the experience of staying in the high desert, is a category of accommodation that the hotel industry of 20 years ago did not contain. It is a hybrid of private rental, hospitality, and wilderness adjacency. The platform that listed the property had no surveillance. The host had no presence on site during the rental. The neighboring properties were too distant to have any awareness of the guests. The cellular network in the area was unreliable. The surrounding terrain was potentially lethal. When a person walks out of a vacation rental like this in distress, no system is watching. There is no front desk to call. There is no hallway camera to record the direction of travel. There is no neighbor to notice. There is no parking lot attendant. There is no security desk. The property is a private home that the platform has converted into a hospitality product. but the platform has not converted the property's surveillance infrastructure into hospitality-grade infrastructure. The platform has, in effect, monetized the privacy that the original homeowner valued. That privacy was the reason the homeowner could list the property as a unique experience. That privacy was also the reason no one saw Lauren Cho walk into the desert. There is a structural problem with the vacation rental category, that to name directly. The major rental platforms have built large businesses around the principle that hosts are not employees, and properties are not hotels. The platforms are, in their own self-description, marketplaces that connect travelers with private property owners. This self-description has legal and regulatory consequences. It also has safety consequences. A hotel is required to meet certain safety standards. A vacation rental is generally not subject to the same requirements. The smoke detectors, the fire exits, the emergency lighting, the security infrastructure, the staffing for guest welfare, all of these are present at hotels because regulations and corporate liability concerns require them. None of them are systematically required at vacation rentals. The traveler who books a vacation rental gets the privacy, the unique experience, the price advantage. The traveler also gets the absence of the safety infrastructure that a hotel of comparable price would have provided. Lauren Cho walked out of a school bus in the middle of the Mojave Desert. The school bus was a hospitality product. The desert around it was not. No one was watching. The platform that had sold the experience had no role to play in finding her. The host had no presents to send. The property had no surveillance to review. By the standards of the hotel category that this video has been examining, the property where Lauren died was, in surveillance terms, the closest thing to a wilderness that the hotel category contains. The vacation rental model has expanded enormously since 2021. There are now millions of listings on the major platforms across the United States. Many of them are in remote locations. Many of them are isolated from neighbors. Many of them have no on-site presence. When a guest in one of these properties walks out the front door in distress or is taken from the property against their will, the surveillance failure is total. There is nothing to fall back on. The platform did not build a hotel. The platform built a directory of private spaces that were never designed to monitor their inhabitants. The next case is the most famous American hotel trip disappearance of the last 25 years. It involves an American teenager, a high school graduation trip to a Caribbean island, an international hotel, and a confession that came 18 years after the disappearance. The case is, in some sense, resolved. In another sense, it has never been resolved at all, because the woman who disappeared has never been found. Her name was Natalee Holloway. She was 18 years old. She had just graduated from Mountain Brook High School in Mountain Brook, Alabama, an affluent suburb of Birmingham. She was about to begin her freshman year at the University of Alabama. In late May of 2005, she traveled with 124 other graduating seniors from Mountain Brook on a group trip to the island of Aruba in the Caribbean. The trip was a tradition at the school. Several chaperones accompanied the group, but the level of supervision was, by every account given afterward, less than parents had been led to expect. The group stayed at the Holiday Inn Sunspree Resort in Palm Beach, Aruba. The resort was a large beachfront property that catered to American tourists. The seniors had their own rooms, organized by friend groups. Natalee shared a room with several classmates. The trip ran from May 26th to May 30th. On the final evening, May 29th into May 30th, the group went out together to bars and clubs in the capital city of Oranjestad. The plan, communicated to the chaperones, was that the group would return to the hotel by midnight and gather at the airport early in the morning for the return flight to Alabama. Natalee was at a bar called Carlos and Charlie's during the final evening. The bar was a popular tourist destination in Oranjestad, known for high-volume late-night business catering to vacationers. Around midnight, she was seen leaving the bar. She was not seen leaving alone. She was seen leaving in the company of 3 young men who had been at the bar that night. The young men were Joran van der Sloot, a 17-year-old Dutch teenager who lived on Aruba, and 2 brothers, Deepak and Satish Kalpo. The Kalpo brothers were locals. Van der Sloot was the son of a Dutch judge stationed on the island. The 3 were known to the bar scene in Oranjestad and had been encountered by other Mountain Brook students during the trip. Natalee did not return to the Holiday Inn. The next morning, when the group was preparing to leave for the airport, her classmates realized she was missing. Her packed luggage was still in her hotel room. Her passport was in the room. Her plane ticket was in the room. Everything that defined her as a returning American student was in that room. She was not. What followed was, at the time, one of the largest international missing persons investigations in modern American media history. The Holloway family flew to Aruba immediately. The Aruban authorities, the Dutch authorities, since Aruba is a constituent country of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, and eventually the FBI all became involved. Search efforts on land and sea covered Aruba for weeks. Van der Sloot and the Kalpo brothers were questioned, arrested, released, rearrested, and ultimately released again without charges, multiple times over the years that followed. Their accounts of what happened on the night of May 29th shifted. They contradicted each other. They contradicted themselves. The Aruban legal system, working within the constraints of Dutch judicial procedure, could not establish enough evidence to bring formal charges that would result in conviction. In 2010, Joran van der Sloot killed a young woman named Stephanie Flores in Lima, Peru, on the 5th anniversary of Natalee's disappearance. He was arrested, tried, and convicted in Peru. He received a 28-year sentence and was incarcerated in a Peruvian prison. In 2023, 18 years after Natalee's disappearance, the United States Department of Justice extradited van der Sloot from Peru to the United States to face federal charges related to an extortion scheme. The scheme, which van der Sloot had run while imprisoned in Peru, involved attempts to extort money from the Holloway family in exchange for information about Natalee's death and the location of her remains. As part of his plea agreement in the federal extortion case, van der Sloot provided a confession to having killed Natalee on the night of May 29, 2005. He described, in the confession, having taken her from the beach near the Holiday Inn, having killed her in a sequence of events that he characterized as resulting from a confrontation between them, and having disposed of her body in the ocean. The confession was accepted as part of the federal plea agreement. Van der Sloot was sentenced to 20 additional years on the extortion charge, to be served after the Peruvian sentence is complete. The Holloway family received, after 18 years, an official acknowledgement of what had happened to Natalee. They did not receive her remains. Her body has never been recovered. I think about this case, and the thing I find most disturbing is the hotel itself. The Holiday Inn Sunspree Resort, on the evening of May 29, 2005, did everything a major branded American resort was supposed to do. The check-in records were in order. The room assignments were in order. The chaperones had been notified of the group's plans. The hotel's surveillance at the property entrance and in the lobby recorded the comings and goings of the senior class throughout the evening. The hotel did not, and could not, follow Natalee from the bar in Oranjestad back to a beach where she was taken. The hotel's recording infrastructure ended at the property line. The beach where, by van der Sloot's eventual confession, the violence occurred was beyond the property line. Aruba's coastline is open. Resort beaches transition into public beaches without clear boundaries. A person who walks down the beach from the Holiday Inn toward the open coast crosses out of the resort's surveillance zone within a few hundred yards. This is the architectural fact about hotel surveillance that the Natalee Holloway case demonstrated. Even before the Sudiksha Konanki case demonstrated it again 20 years later in the same kind of Caribbean resort environment. The cameras end at the beach. The beach is where the most vulnerable hours of a young traveler's trip often happen. The cameras have nothing to say about what happens there. The next case takes us back 43 years to the Central Florida coast in the early 1980s. It is the oldest case I have included. It is also, in my view, the case that most clearly demonstrates how the hotel category throughout this investigation has always been about more than just the hotel building. It has been about the entire trip context. Her name was Tammy Lynn Leppert. She was 17 years old. She had grown up in Rockledge, Florida, on the Space Coast, near Cocoa Beach. She had been competing in beauty pageants since childhood and had transitioned into modeling and acting work as a teenager. By 1983, she had appeared in supporting roles in 2 films that would, in retrospect, become well-known parts of American cinema history. She had a small part in the film Spring Break, which was filmed on the Florida coast in 1982. She had a brief appearance in the film Scarface, in scenes filmed in Florida that same year. She was, at 17, on the cusp of what could have been a meaningful career in entertainment. In the months leading up to her disappearance, Tammy Lynn had become increasingly anxious, agitated, and according to family accounts given in the years since, fearful of unspecified threats. The cause of her change in behavior has been the subject of significant speculation. Family members have described her as believing she had witnessed something during her acting work that put her in danger. She had been hospitalized briefly for psychiatric evaluation. She had returned home. Her behavior remained unstable. On July 6 of 1983, Tammy Lynn was at a location in Cocoa Beach called the Glass Bank. The Glass Bank was a distinctive mid-century modern bank building, a small architectural landmark in the beach town that has since been demolished. The location was a few blocks from the beachfront hotels and motels that line the Cocoa Beach coastline. Tammy Lynn was with a friend named Keith Crowne. According to Crew's account, given to police at the time, the two had an argument. Tammy Lynn became upset. She got out of his car at the Glass Bank parking lot. He drove away. She was, by his account, last seen walking on the sidewalk in the direction of the beach hotels. She has not been seen since. The Cocoa Beach Police Department and the Brevard County Sheriff's Office investigated the disappearance over the months and years that followed. Keith Crowne was interviewed multiple times. He was, at various points in the years since, considered a person of interest, then cleared, then re-examined. He has consistently maintained that he did not harm Tammy Lynn, and that he believes she walked away from his car and was harmed by someone she encountered afterward. The beachfront hotel and motel district of Cocoa Beach in 1983 was, like most American coastal hospitality strips of that era, a high-volume transient environment. The surveillance infrastructure was minimal by modern standards. Most of the hotels and motels had cameras only at front entrances. The boardwalks, the side streets, the parking lots, the alleys behind the buildings were not surveilled in any systematic way. A young woman walking through that environment on a summer evening could pass dozens of locations without being recorded by any working camera. If she met someone, or was met by someone, no system was watching. The connection to hotels in Tammy Lynn's case is the trip context. Her acting work had brought her into regular contact with the Florida hospitality industry. The hotels and motels of Cocoa Beach were the working environment of the small-budget film productions she had appeared in. The boardwalks and beachfront pathways were the connective tissue between the hotels where actors stayed and the locations where they worked. Tammy Lynn, in the months and years before her disappearance, had been part of that world. On the evening of July 6th, she walked into that world one more time, and the world did not return her. What I find difficult about this case is the same thing I find difficult about Roxanne Paltauf's case 23 years later. The kind of hotel environment that Tammy Lynn walked into was the kind that does not provide the recording infrastructure to answer the simplest investigative questions. Which direction did she walk? Who did she meet? What car did she get into, if any? The cameras of 1983 Cocoa Beach were not capable of answering any of these questions. The cameras of 21st century budget motels in North Austin, 23 years later, were not capable of answering them either. The technology has improved. The economic incentives to deploy that technology in low-end hospitality, where margins are thin and surveillance is an expense, have not improved at the same rate. Tammy Lynn Leppert has been missing for 43 years. Her case remains open with the Cocoa Beach Police Department. Her family, through her mother and her sister, and now through subsequent generations of relatives, has continued to advocate for renewed investigation. The Florida Department of Law Enforcement maintains her in its missing persons database. She is one of the longest-standing unsolved missing persons cases in the state. Linda Curtis, Tammy Lynn's mother, spent the rest of her life working on her daughter's case. She was, by every account given by people who knew her, never able to accept the official position that the investigation could not produce a result. She gave interviews to local Florida television stations on most anniversaries. She wrote letters to law enforcement agencies asking for renewed attention. She maintained contact with anyone who came forward with information, no matter how thin the lead. She pursued, over decades, every theory that emerged about what might have happened to her daughter on the evening of July 6th, 1983. Linda passed away in 2012, still without an answer. What Linda spent decades trying to communicate to investigators, and what her surviving family members have continued to communicate, is that Tammy Lynn's disappearance occurred in a specific context that the official investigation, in their view, never adequately pursued. The films Tammy Lynn had appeared in were filmed in Florida in 1982 and early 1983. Scarface, the larger of the two productions, involved significant location work in Miami and southern Florida. The film, set in the world of the Florida cocaine trade of the early 1980s, drew on the actual environment of that trade for its locations, its extras, and in some cases its consultants. The family has long maintained that Tammy Lynn, in the months before her disappearance, expressed fear about something she had observed during her work on these productions. The specifics of what she observed, by accounts from family members, were never clearly communicated even to them. She told them she had seen something. She told them she was afraid. She did not tell them, in any detail they could later relay to investigators, what she had seen. The Cocoa Beach Police Department, working a missing persons case in a small beach town in 1983, did not have the resources to investigate the kinds of connections the family suspected. The investigation focused on the immediate witness, Keith Crowne, and on the physical search of the Cocoa Beach area in the days following the disappearance. The broader film industry context, if it was relevant, was not within the department's institutional capacity to pursue. The Brevard County Sheriff's Office, with greater resources, did not take over the case in any sustained way. The Florida Department of Law Enforcement provided some support, but did not lead. The case settled, over the years, into the routine of a long, cold missing persons file. The hotel and motel district of Cocoa Beach in 1983 was a specific kind of environment. The Space Coast economy of that era depended on tourism, on the proximity of Kennedy Space Center, and on the kind of low-cost beach hospitality that drew families, college students on spring break, and the working transient population that supported the tourism industry. The motels along Atlantic Avenue and the boardwalk strips between them were the connective tissue of this economy. The film productions that came through, including the 2 productions Tammy Lynn appeared in, used the area as both location and lodging. Actors stayed at the same motels as the tourists. Crew members worked in the same restaurants as the cocktail waitresses who supplemented their wages with whatever opportunities the season provided. The boundary between the legitimate tourism economy and the various extra-legal economies that operated alongside it was porous. Whether Tammy Lynn's disappearance was connected to that porous boundary, or was the result of an entirely different cause encountered on the evening of July 6th, has never been definitively determined. The connection to the film industry, the connection to the hospitality strip, the connection to the broader Florida environment of the early 1980s, all remain in the realm of family conviction rather than investigative finding. I think about this case alongside the Roxanne Paltauf case, separated by 23 years and most of the continent, and what I notice is the structural similarity. A young woman walks out of a hospitality environment in distress. She walks into a surrounding area that does not have surveillance infrastructure adequate to track her movements. The most basic question, which way did she go, cannot be answered. The investigation falls back on witnesses, on the limited physical evidence available, on family conviction. The case stalls. Decades pass. The family ages, dies, is replaced by the next generation that continues the advocacy. The motel, or the hotel, or the parking lot, or the boardwalk where she was last seen, continues to operate, eventually gets remodeled or replaced, eventually has nothing left of the original physical space where the disappearance occurred. The next case happened in 2017, in suburban Chicago, in a hotel that was a major branded property of a major American hospitality chain. This case is, in the technical sense, resolved. The cause of death has been officially determined. The case is closed by the relevant police department, and yet the case remains, for a significant portion of the public who have followed it, deeply unresolved. The question is not what happened, in the sense of where the body was found. The question is how the hotel architecture allowed what happened to happen. Her name was Kenneka Jenkins. She was 19 years old. She was from Chicago. On the evening of September 8th, 2017, she attended a party at the Crowne Plaza Chicago O'Hare Hotel in Rosemont, Illinois. Rosemont is a suburb of Chicago, adjacent to the O'Hare International Airport. The Crowne Plaza is a large, convention-oriented hotel. The party Kenneka attended was a private gathering held in a hotel room rented for the occasion. Several of her friends were at the party. At some point during the evening, Kenneka became separated from her friend group. The exact circumstances of the separation have been disputed in the years since. What is established by the hotel's surveillance footage, which has been reviewed extensively, and portions of which have been released to the public by the Rosemont Police Department, is that Kenneka was captured on multiple hotel cameras over the course of the night, alone, wandering through hallways and through service areas of the hotel. The footage is extensive. There is footage of her in elevators. There is footage of her in hallways. There is footage of her in the back-of-house service corridors that connect the public areas of the hotel to the kitchen and storage areas. There is footage of her, alone, walking unsteadily, opening and closing doors that were not meant for guest access. The footage covers a period of several hours. Throughout that period, Kenneka was alone in the frame. No hotel staff member intervened. No security personnel approached her. No automated alert appears to have been triggered by her presence in non-guest areas of the property. At some point during the early hours of September 9th, Kenneka entered a walk-in freezer in the hotel's kitchen area. The freezer was, by the hotel's account, supposed to be locked or to have a functional alarm. The investigation into the case raised significant questions about whether the freezer was properly secured that night and whether the alarm functioned as designed. Kenneka was found in the freezer 21 hours after she had entered it. She had died of exposure to extreme cold combined with the effects of alcohol consumption. The Cook County Medical Examiner ruled the death an accident. The official conclusion was that Kenneka, under the influence of alcohol, had wandered through the hotel in a state of progressive disorientation, had entered the freezer through a door that should not have been accessible, and had been unable to exit due to her impaired condition. The hotel was, by the official ruling, not the cause of her death. The freezer was a contributing physical environment, but the death itself was attributed to her own state of intoxication and the resulting incapacity. The Jenkins family, and a significant portion of the public who have followed the case, have rejected this conclusion. The family has filed civil litigation against the hotel and several individuals. The litigation has raised allegations about whether other persons present at the party contributed to Kenneka's condition, and whether the hotel's failure to monitor its surveillance cameras in real time or to respond to a guest visibly wandering through service areas constituted negligence. Some context here matters. The Crowne Plaza Chicago O'Hare, like many large convention hotels, is staffed by a security team during overnight hours. The team is small. Its primary function during overnight shifts is to respond to incidents that are reported by guests or by hotel staff, not to actively monitor surveillance feeds in real time. The cameras at the property are typically reviewed only when an incident has been reported, or when management has a specific reason to look at a specific recording. The footage of Kenneka in the back-of-house corridors was reviewed after she had been reported missing by her family. By the time it was reviewed, she had already been in the freezer for many hours. The Jenkins family's civil case raised the question of whether the hotel should have had monitoring practices that would have flagged Kenneka's presence in service areas in real time. The hotel's position, in litigation, has been that the cost and practical difficulty of real-time monitoring at every hotel of the chain's scale would be prohibitive, and that the responsibility to keep guests out of back-of-house areas falls primarily on the structural security of those areas, the locks, the alarms, the keycard requirements. The freezer at the Crowne Plaza was supposed to be secured. The investigation raised significant questions about whether it actually was secured on the night in question. The hotel chain has not, to my knowledge, publicly disclosed the outcome of internal reviews of the freezer access protocols at that property. The footage of Kenneka that has been publicly released is difficult to watch. She is alone. She is visibly impaired. She is in places that guests should not be. She opens doors. She closes doors. She moves down hallways with the slow, uncertain pace of someone whose perception of her environment has begun to fail. The footage covers a period of time during which she could have been helped by any staff member who looked at the right camera feed. No staff member did. The footage demonstrates, in extended documentary form, what the absence of real-time monitoring looks like when it produces a fatal outcome. The Cook County Medical Examiner's ruling has not been overturned. The case remains officially classified as an accidental death. The Rosemont Police Department closed its investigation. The civil litigation has continued, with various motions and rulings over the years that have followed. The family has not recovered Kenneka's life. They have spent 8 years asking how a hotel with comprehensive surveillance failed to prevent her death, when the surveillance recorded her in distress for hours. Consider what this case demonstrates about hotel surveillance that the other cases I have walked you through have not demonstrated as clearly. The Crowne Plaza did record Kenneka. The cameras worked. The footage was preserved. The eventual review of the footage produced a near-complete reconstruction of her movements through the property during her final hours. By any standard of recording, the Crowne Plaza's system performed as designed. What the Crowne Plaza did not do, and what no major American hotel chain currently does at scale, is monitor the surveillance footage in real time with the staffing and authority to intervene when a guest is visibly in crisis. The cameras were running. The cameras were recording. The cameras were not being watched in a way that produced action. Kenneka walked, alone and visibly impaired, through hallways and service corridors for hours. She opened doors that guests should not open. She entered areas that should have triggered staff response. The system recorded all of it. The system did not act. This is the same lesson the Elisa Lam case taught us at the Cecil Hotel 4 years earlier. The cameras saw. The cameras did not save. The architecture of hotel surveillance is the architecture of after-the-fact reconstruction, not real-time intervention. We have built hotels that can show us exactly what happened to a guest in crisis after the guest has died. We have not built hotels that can prevent the death. There is something else worth naming about Kenneka's case. The hotel chain involved is a major brand. The property is on the inventory of one of the largest hospitality companies in the world. If a property of that scale, with the security budget that a major brand can afford, cannot or will not monitor its cameras in real time to prevent a young woman from dying in a freezer in its own kitchen, the situation at smaller and lower-end properties is, in proportion, worse. The economics of hotel security haven't changed in the 8 years since Kenneka died. The chain has not, as far as has been publicly disclosed, changed its real-time monitoring practices. The freezer is, presumably, locked now. The next guest who wanders into a service area visibly in crisis, at this property or another property in the chain, will encounter the same architecture of recording without intervention that Kenneka encountered. Kenneka Jenkins is at rest. The case is officially closed. The family has not stopped asking the questions. The hotel surveillance, the most extensive of any oldest case I have included, did not save her. The last case is the one that, like the Anaya Blanchard case in the previous video, exists to demonstrate what conditions must align for hotel surveillance to translate into actual resolution. The case is solved. The perpetrator was caught. He is in prison for the rest of his life. The cameras helped, but the cameras alone were not enough. Her name was Brittanee Drexel. She was 17 years old. She was from a small town in upstate New York called Chile, near Rochester. In April of 2009, she traveled to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, for spring break with a group of friends. The trip was made without her parents' permission. Her mother, Dawn Drexel, had declined to authorize the trip. Brittanee had told her parents she was staying with a friend in the area and had then secretly traveled to Myrtle Beach. The group was staying at the Blue Water Resort, an oceanfront hotel on the Myrtle Beach coastline. The resort was, by the standards of mid-tier American oceanfront properties, a typical spring break destination. The cameras at the property recorded the group's arrival. The cameras at the lobby and at the elevator banks recorded their movements through the property during the trip. By every indication that has been publicly disclosed, the surveillance at the Blue Water Resort functioned as designed. On April 25, 2009, Brittanee left the Blue Water Resort to meet some friends who were staying at a different hotel nearby, the Blue Water Inn, located approximately 3 blocks south along Ocean Boulevard. The walk between the two properties was short and along the well-trafficked beachfront strip. Brittanee was captured on the Blue Water Resort's surveillance leaving the lobby. She was captured on at least one camera at the Blue Water Inn arriving there. She left the Blue Water Inn shortly afterward, intending to walk back to the Blue Water Resort. The exact time she left has been documented by surveillance and witness accounts. She did not arrive at the Blue Water Resort. For 13 years, what happened in the few blocks of beachfront between the two hotels remained unknown. The Myrtle Beach Police Department, the South Carolina State Law Enforcement Division, and eventually the Federal Bureau of Investigation worked the case. Multiple persons of interest were identified over the years. None could be conclusively linked to her disappearance through the evidence available. The Drexel family advocated continuously. The case became one of the most discussed unsolved missing persons cases in the eastern United States. In May of 2022, 13 years after Brittanee disappeared, a man named Raymond Moody was arrested and charged in connection with her abduction and murder. The investigation that led to his arrest had been ongoing for years and had drawn on a combination of physical evidence, witness statements, and information developed through other investigations. In October of 2022, Moody pleaded guilty to murder, kidnapping, and rape. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He provided information that led law enforcement to the location of Brittanee's remains, which were recovered from a rural area of Georgetown County, South Carolina, several miles inland from Myrtle Beach. What made this case solvable, when so many of the other cases here remain open, comes down to a few specific facts. First, the hotel's surveillance at the two properties documented Brittanee's movements up to the moments before she disappeared, which gave investigators a precise starting point for the timeline. Second, the location where she vanished, the beachfront blocks between the two hotels, narrowed the geographic search area significantly. Third, persistent investigation over 13 years, supported by continued family advocacy, kept the case active rather than allowing it to recede into the archive. Fourth, the eventual arrest depended on information that came from sources beyond the hotel surveillance itself, including the investigation of unrelated cases that eventually pointed toward Moody. Take any of those four conditions away, and the case might still be unsolved. There is more to the Brittanee Drexel case to walk you through, because the 13-year arc between her disappearance and Raymond Moody's conviction illustrates how cold cases actually progress, or fail to progress, in the modern American criminal justice system. The progress was not steady. The progress involved years of false starts, public statements that turned out to be wrong, and a 2016 FBI press conference that made claims about Brittanee's death, which were later, in important respects, not borne out by the eventual conviction. In June of 2016, the FBI held a press conference in Charleston, South Carolina, in which an FBI agent stated that the agency had received information that Brittanee had been taken to a property in McClellanville, South Carolina, that she had been held captive there, and that she had been killed by a person other than Raymond Moody. The press conference named a different individual, Timothy Deshawn Taylor, as the person connected to her death. The information had come from inmate witnesses who had been incarcerated with Taylor's father. The FBI was, in that press conference, making a public commitment to a theory of the case that pointed toward a particular individual. That theory of the case did not result in any prosecution of Timothy Deshawn Taylor for Brittanee's murder. The federal investigation continued for years. The witnesses who had provided the original information were assessed by prosecutors as not reliable enough to support charges that would survive trial. The case against Taylor did not advance. The public statement from the FBI press conference of June 2016 remained as a matter of record, but the criminal case that the statement seemed to foreshadow did not develop. Then, in May of 2022, 6 years after the FBI press conference, the case took a different direction entirely. Raymond Moody, a man with a prior criminal history, was arrested in connection with Brittanee's abduction and murder. The investigation that led to Moody had developed through channels separate from the McClellanville theory that had been publicly stated in 2016. Moody had been in the Myrtle Beach area in April of 2009. He had a history that, in retrospect, included circumstances consistent with the kind of crime Brittanee's disappearance had been. The Georgetown County Sheriff's Office, working with the South Carolina State Law Enforcement Division and the FBI, developed the evidence that produced his arrest. The plea agreement Moody reached in October of 2022 included the recovery of Brittanee's remains. Moody provided information that led investigators to a location in rural Georgetown County, several miles inland from Myrtle Beach. Her remains were recovered. The Drexel family received, after 13 years, the answer that had been promised in different forms over the years, but that had not arrived until that moment. Dawn Drexel, Brittanee's mother, gave a statement after the plea in which she described the kind of exhaustion that is only available to families who have spent more than a decade waiting for an answer that the system kept failing to produce. What this 13-year arc demonstrates, and what I want you to understand about how cold cases actually work, is that the path from disappearance to resolution is not the path the public usually imagines. The public imagines that investigators follow leads, develop suspects, build evidence, and prosecute. The reality is that most leads do not develop, most suspects do not produce admissible evidence, and most public statements about investigative progress are tentative descriptions of working theories that may or may not bear fruit. The Brittanee Drexel case had a high-profile public statement in 2016 that pointed in one direction. The case was eventually resolved by an investigation in a different direction entirely. Both directions involved real investigative work. Only one of them produced a conviction. The hotel surveillance from the Blue Water Resort and the Blue Water Inn was, throughout this 13-year arc, part of the file. It was reviewed. It was preserved. It was offered to whichever theory of the case was being pursued. The surveillance did not by itself point toward Moody, or toward Taylor, or toward any other specific suspect. The surveillance established that Brittanee had been at certain locations at certain times. The surveillance ended at the moment she walked out of the Blue Water Inn, intending to walk back to the Blue Water Resort. The surveillance had no contribution to make to the question of who she encountered in those few blocks. The Blue Water Resort is still in operation. The Blue Water Inn is still in operation. The block of Ocean Boulevard where Brittanee crossed the threshold is still there, still trafficked by spring break visitors every April, still surveilled by the cameras at the two properties that bookend it. The threshold she crossed is still a threshold. The cameras on either side of it still cannot see what happens in the middle. This is the lesson Brittanee's case teaches us about all 7 of the unsolved cases that came before it in this investigation. The hotels recorded what they were designed to record. The surveillance at the property level was, in nearly every case, adequate. The threshold problem was not a hotel surveillance failure in the basic technical sense. The threshold problem was what happened in the spaces between the hotel surveillance zones: the beach, the street, the parking lot, the block between 2 hotels, the desert mile beyond a vacation rental, the motel hallway with the broken camera, the Caribbean coastline beyond the resort property line. The cameras recorded the arrival, The cameras recorded the departure from the lobby. The cameras did not record what happened in the streets, on the beaches, in the parking lots, on the desert roads, on the open coastline. The hotels did their job, in the limited institutional sense in which hotels do that job. The job was never enough. Sit for a moment with what these 8 cases together have shown you. 8 women, ranging in age from 17 to 30, across 43 years of American hotel disappearances, across budget motels and luxury resorts and converted desert school buses listed on rental platforms, across the Florida Space Coast and the Texas Interstate Corridor and the Mojave Desert and the Caribbean shoreline and the suburban Chicago kitchen, across hotels that had no surveillance and hotels that had the most extensive surveillance an American hospitality property has ever installed. The thread that runs through all 8 is not a kind of hotel. It is a kind of threshold. The threshold is the moment a guest crosses from the hotel's institutional zone of liability into a space the hotel does not consider its responsibility. The beach in front of the resort, the street between the 2 hotels, the desert beyond the vacation rental, the freezer behind the kitchen, the parking lot off the motel front office, the Caribbean coastline that begins where the resort grounds end, the boardwalk past the beachfront motels. In every case, the hotel's recording infrastructure stopped at this line. In every case, the guest crossed it. In every case, the system had no follow-up. Let me be honest about what this means. I do not think the hotel industry is going to fix this. The economic incentives that produced the current architecture of hotel surveillance, where cameras protect property and not guests, are not going to change. The cost of monitoring every camera in every hotel in America in real time, with the staffing required to intervene when a guest is in crisis, would be enormous. No major hospitality chain is going to absorb that cost voluntarily. The legal liability environment that would compel them to do it does not currently exist. The Kenneka Jenkins family's civil litigation, and similar litigation in cases I have not discussed here, may eventually move the industry. Or it may not. The change, if it comes, will be slow. What this means for you, watching this video on a Sunday afternoon, planning a trip, packing a bag, considering a hotel reservation for next weekend, is this. The cameras at your hotel are not watching you. They are recording you, which is not the same thing. If something happens to you, the footage will be reviewed by the police, after the fact. After it is too late to help you, the hotel will cooperate with the investigation. The hotel will provide the recordings. The hotel will not have intervened. This is not an argument against staying in hotels. It is an argument against the assumption that staying in a hotel is by itself protective. The assumption is built into the way most of us think about hospitality. We believe that a hotel is safer than a vacation rental, that a vacation rental is safer than a campsite, that all of them are safer than walking alone in a city we do not know. Those assumptions are true in some senses and false in others. The cases I have walked you through are an argument that the false senses are larger than most travelers realize. There are 8 women I have walked you through. 1 has been recovered and rests with her family. 1 has been confessed to, but has never been found. The other 6 remain in various states of resolution and irresolution. Elisa Lamb, recovered from the water tank, the cause of death officially established. Sudiksha Konanki, presumed drowned, no body recovered. Roxanne Paltauf, missing for 19 years. Lauren Cho recovered, cause of death established. Natalee Holloway, confessed by her killer, no body recovered. Tammy Lynn Leppert, missing for 43 years. Kenneka Jenkins recovered, manner of death disputed by her family. Brittanee Drexel, recovered, killer convicted. The number of families described here who have a body to bury is small. The number of families who have an explanation they can accept is smaller. The number of cases in which the hotel surveillance was the thing that produced the resolution is exactly 1. And even in that case, the surveillance was only a starting point. The rest was 13 years of investigation that had nothing to do with the cameras. If you have stayed in a hotel and walked out of it, you have crossed the threshold. The threshold is closer than most of us realize. The threshold does not care about your nationality, or your education, or your hotel rating, or your safety habits. The threshold is the place where the recording stops, and your story continues, and the building has no way to follow. One more thing to say, before this video ends. The cases I have described occurred over 4 decades. The hotels involved ranged from luxury Caribbean resorts to budget Texas motels, to a converted school bus in the Mojave Desert. The victims were women in their teens, 20s, and 30s. They were students, aspiring actresses, vacationers, mothers, young professionals. The single feature that connects them, beyond the threshold concept I have been walking you through, is that they were each, at the moment of their disappearance, somewhere they had every reason to feel safe. They had checked into hotels. They had paid for their lodging. They had every conventional expectation of being protected by the infrastructure of modern American hospitality. The lesson is not that hotels are dangerous. Hotels are, statistically, not particularly dangerous. Millions of Americans check into hotels every night and check out the next morning without incident. The lesson is that the institutional protection a hotel provides is narrower than most travelers realize. The hotel protects its property. The hotel manages its liability. The hotel responds to incidents reported to its staff. The hotel does not, as a rule, watch you in the moments that matter most. Practical things travelers can do to reduce their exposure to the threshold problem do exist, and I will mention a few without pretending that any of them eliminate the risk. Stay at properties with on-site staff present overnight, rather than vacation rentals without on-site presence. Tell someone outside your travel group your itinerary, including the specific hotel and room. Check in with that person at intervals that you agree on before you depart. Keep your phone on your person rather than in the room. Avoid leaving the hotel alone late at night in destinations where you do not know the local environment. Recognize that resort all-inclusive bracelets do not extend to public beaches, and that the property line is real, even when the marketing of the resort makes the boundary feel invisible. None of this guarantees safety. All of it improves the odds. There are 8 women in this investigation. 1 has been recovered and rests with her family. 1 has been confessed to, but has never been found. The other 6 remain in various states of resolution and irresolution. Elisa Lamb, recovered from the water tank. The cause of death officially established. Sudiksha Konanki, presumed drowned. No body recovered. Roxanne Paltauf, missing for 19 years. Lauren Cho recovered, cause of death established, but with ongoing family questions about the timeline of the investigation. Natalee Holloway, confessed by her killer. No body recovered. Tammy Lynn Leppert, missing for 43 years. Kenneka Jenkins, recovered. Manner of death disputed by her family. Brittanee Drexel, recovered. Killer convicted. The number of families described here who have a body to bury is small. The number of families who have an explanation they can accept is smaller. The number of cases in which the hotel surveillance was the thing that produced the resolution is exactly 1. And even in that case, the surveillance was only a starting point. The rest was 13 years of investigation that had nothing to do with the cameras. I want to ask you to do one thing if any of these names has stayed with you while you have been listening. Search for the case. Read what the investigators have published. If you have ever stayed at any of the hotels involved, if you have ever traveled to any of these destinations, if you remember anything from any of the nights of these disappearances, contact the agencies investigating the case. Information that seemed unimportant at the time of the disappearance might be the missing piece. The cameras stopped recording. The witnesses who were there did not. If you have ever walked out of a hotel room and into the street, into a beach, into a parking lot, into a back hallway, you have been at the threshold. The threshold is where the system loses you. The threshold is closer than the lobby. The threshold is closer than the elevator door. The threshold is, for most American travelers, a doorway that we cross every day without noticing it is a doorway at all. This has been Echo 7.